The morning sun cast long shadows across the pristine tarmac of Starhawk Pilot Academy as Jessica Collins stepped off the Greyhound bus, clutching a worn duffel bag and a manila folder containing her application. At 24, she had worked 3 jobs to save enough for just the application fee, spending countless nights studying flight manuals borrowed from the local library. Her faded jeans and secondhand sneakers stood in stark contrast to the luxury cars dropping off other applicants. The Academy's imposing glass facade gleamed like a fortress of privilege. Through the windows she could see state-of-the-art flight simulators and perfectly uniformed cadets moving with practiced confidence. This was her dream, to earn her wings and prove that a girl from rural Kansas could soar as high as anyone. "Excuse me, miss," called a security guard as Jessica approached the main gate. Officer Bradley Mitchell, according to his name tag, looked her up and down with barely concealed disdain. "Are you lost? The community college is about 10 miles that way." Jessica straightened her shoulders. "I'm here for my admission interview. Jessica Collins, scheduled for 9 a.m. Mitchell's eyebrows shot up as he consulted his clipboard with exaggerated slowness. Collins, nope, don't see you on any list." He smirked. "Maybe you got the wrong place, honey. This is Starhawk, not some flight training school for wannabes." "There must be a mistake," Jessica insisted, pulling out her confirmation email on her cracked phone screen. "I received this yesterday confirming my interview time." Before Mitchell could respond, a group of cadets emerged from the building, their designer flight suits crisp and their boots polished to mirror shine. Tyler Richardson, whose father owned a major airline, sauntered over with his usual arrogant grin. "What's all the commotion, Bradley?" Tyler asked, eyeing Jessica like she was an amusing curiosity. "Don't tell me someone's trying to sneak into Starhawk through the front door?" "This young lady claims she has an interview," Mitchell replied, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "But we both know that's impossible, right?" The other cadets gathered around, pulling out their phones to film. Madison Foster, whose social media account boasted 500,000 followers, started live streaming immediately. "Oh my God, guys! Look at this! Someone actually thought they could just walk into Starhawk wearing those shoes?" She zoomed in on Jessica's worn sneakers, and the comments began flooding in with laughing emojis and cruel remarks. Jessica felt her cheeks burn, but maintained her composure. "I've prepared for this interview for 2 years. I know I belong here." Tyler circled her slowly, his voice loud enough for his streaming audience. "Sweetheart, this isn't a charity case. Do you see that Ferrari over there? That's mine. My family has donated more to this academy than you'll make in your lifetime. This place is for people with pedigree." "And proper attire?" added another cadet, causing the group to erupt in laughter. Just then, Captain Robert Hayes emerged from the administration building, a decorated former Air Force pilot with silver hair and steely gray eyes. He commanded immediate respect. The cadets quickly pocketed their phones and straightened up. "What's the situation here?" Captain Hayes asked, his voice cutting through the morning air. Mitchell stepped forward. "Sir, this person claims to have an interview, but she's not on any official list. I think there's been some kind of misunderstanding." Captain Hayes took Jessica's folder and scanned the contents with professional detachment. Her heart sank as she watched his expression remain impassive. After what felt like an eternity, he handed the papers back. "Miss Collins, I see here that you have no formal flight training, no letters of recommendation from established pilots, and no family connections to the aviation industry." He paused, studying her face. "Starhawk maintains the highest standards in pilot education. We can't simply admit anyone who shows up at our gate." "Sir, if you just give me a chance to demonstrate—" "The decision has been made," Captain Hayes interrupted. "Security will escort you to the bus stop. I suggest you consider more realistic career options." Tyler smirked triumphantly. "Told you so. Maybe try the local community college. I hear they have a decent automotive program." As the security guards flanked her, Jessica fought back tears of frustration and humiliation. The livestream comments were brutal. "Poor girl. Thinks she can fly? Someone call social services. This is so embarrassing." But as they marched her toward the exit, Jessica caught sight of something that made her pause. Through a gap in the academy's perimeter fence, she spotted an old maintenance hangar in the distance, partially hidden behind newer buildings. Something about it called to her. Maybe it was the way the morning light hit the weathered metal, or perhaps it was just desperate hope. "This isn't over," she whispered to herself as the gate clanged shut behind her. The cadets dispersed, already forgetting about the girl in worn sneakers. Captain Hayes returned to his office, confident that he'd maintained the Academy's prestigious reputation. And Tyler uploaded the footage to his social media with the caption, "When Delusion Meets Reality at Starhawk Academy." None of them realized that Jessica Collins wasn't going home. Instead, she walked around the block and found a small diner, where she ordered coffee and began planning her next move. Through the window, she could see the Academy's runways where jets practiced takeoffs and landings, leaving trails of power and possibility in the sky. She had come too far to give up. Now, 3 days had passed since the humiliation at the gate, but Jessica hadn't left town. She'd found a cheap motel room and spent her time studying the Academy's perimeter, noting the shift changes of security guards and the less monitored areas around the old maintenance buildings. On Wednesday evening, she spotted a familiar face through the chain-link fence. Danny Rodriguez had worked with her briefly at Kansas City Regional Airport, where she'd spent 2 years fueling planes and dreaming of flying them. Now he was wearing Starhawk maintenance coveralls, checking hydraulics on a training aircraft. "Danny!" she called softly through the fence. He looked up, startled, then broke into a grin when he recognized her. "Jess? What the hell are you doing? Here, don't tell me you're actually attending this place." Jessica quickly explained what had happened at the gate. Danny's expression darkened as she described the humiliation and rejection. "Those entitled brats," he muttered. "You know more about aircraft systems than half the cadets here, and you've actually worked on real planes. They judge everything. By Daddy's bank account." "Danny, I need to ask you something, and I understand if you can't help." Jessica gripped the fence. "Is there any way I could get inside, just to prove I belong here?" Danny glanced around nervously. "Jess, if they catch you trespassing, they'll have you arrested. Captain Hayes doesn't mess around with security. Please, just 5 minutes with one of their simulators. That's all I need to show what I can do." After a long pause, Danny sighed and pulled a temporary maintenance badge from his pocket. "This is just for the outer maintenance areas. It won't get you into the main buildings, and if anyone asks, you're here to inspect the electrical systems in Hangar 7. That's the old training facility they barely use anymore." Jessica's heart raced as she accepted the badge. "Thank you. I won't forget this." "Be careful, Jess. These people play for keeps." That night, Jessica slipped through the maintenance gate using Danny's badge. The old hangar sat in darkness, forgotten by the Academy's elite. Inside, she discovered exactly what she'd hoped for: an outdated but functional flight simulator covered in dust and surrounded by stacks of old training manuals. The machine was at least 10 years old, its screens flickering and controls sticky from neglect, but it was operational. Jessica spent the next 4 hours teaching herself the system, running through basic flight patterns and emergency procedures. The simulator was crude compared to the Academy's modern equipment, but it responded to her touch like a faithful old friend. As dawn approached, she powered down the system and carefully covered her tracks. Walking back to her motel, she felt something she hadn't experienced in days: hope. Meanwhile, inside the Academy's dormitories, Tyler Richardson was hosting his usual morning live stream, regaling his followers with stories of the pathetic wannabe pilot who'd been rejected earlier that week. The video had gone viral, accumulating over 2 million views and thousands of cruel comments. "I mean, did you see those shoes?" Tyler laughed into his phone camera. "My dog has better fashion sense. Some people need to learn their place in the world." Madison Foster chimed in from across the common room. "I heard she's still in town, staying at that gross motel on Route 9. Like, honey, take the hint and go home." But they had no idea that their pathetic wannabe was currently becoming intimately familiar with flight systems they'd only read about in textbooks. Night after night, Jessica returned to Hangar 7, pushing the old simulator to its limits and absorbing every detail of the training manuals she found there. By the end of her first week, she could execute perfect landings in crosswinds, handle multiple system failures, and navigate complex flight patterns that would challenge experienced pilots. The simulator's database contains scenarios for various aircraft types, including some military jets that the Academy used for advanced training. One night, as she practiced emergency procedures, Jessica discovered something interesting buried in the simulator's files: flight parameters for an F-35 Lightning II. The Academy apparently had connections to military training programs that weren't publicly advertised. "Interesting," she murmured, loading the F-35 simulation. The fighter jet's controls were vastly more complex than civilian aircraft, but Jessica approached it methodically, studying each system before attempting to fly. The stealth capabilities, vertical landing features, and advanced targeting systems required different techniques than anything she'd encountered. Hours melted away as she immersed herself in mastering the virtual F-35. The learning curve was steep, but her determination was steeper. By sunrise, she could execute basic maneuvers without triggering system warnings. As she prepared to leave that morning, Jessica heard voices approaching the hangar. She quickly shut down the simulator and hid behind a stack of old fuselage panels as two maintenance workers entered. "Supposed to clear out all this junk next week," one was saying. "Captain Hayes wants to convert this space into additional storage." "About time. Nobody's used this old simulator in years. Probably doesn't even work anymore." Jessica's blood ran cold. They were going to destroy her secret training ground. After they left, she sat in the darkness, feeling the weight of limited time pressing down on her. If she was going to prove herself, it would have to be soon. That afternoon, she overheard something at the local diner that changed everything. Two Academy instructors were discussing an upcoming event, a special demonstration featuring an actual F-35 Lightning II, scheduled to arrive the following week for a promotional flight. Jessica's pulse quickened. An F-35. The same aircraft she'd been learning to fly in the simulator. She pulled out her phone and began researching everything she could find about the demonstration. According to the Academy's website, it would be a public event with media coverage designed to showcase Starhawk's connections to military aviation programs. As she read, an audacious plan began forming in her mind. It was dangerous, probably impossible, and definitely illegal. But it was also her only chance to prove that she belonged in the sky. The girl they'd dismissed at the gate was about to become their biggest nightmare. Jessica's world collapsed on a Tuesday morning when she arrived at Hangar 7 to find a heavy padlock securing the doors. A notice posted on the building read, "Condemned, scheduled for demolition. No entry by order of Captain Hayes." Her secret training ground was gone. Panic and rage warred in her chest as she rattled the chain, but it held firm. 3 weeks of night flights, 3 weeks of pushing herself to master systems that Academy cadets only dreamed of flying. All of it threatened by a single lock. "Having problems?" Jessica spun around to find Captain Hayes standing behind her, flanked by 2 security guards. His gray eyes held no warmth, only cold satisfaction. "This is private property, Miss Collins. I believe we made it clear that you're not welcome here." "I wasn't doing anything wrong," Jessica said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I was just trespassing, breaking and entering, using equipment without authorization." Hayes stepped closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "We know you've been sneaking in here at night. We have security footage of you using that simulator. What you've done constitutes multiple felonies." Jessica's heart hammered against her ribs. "I was just trying to learn. I wasn't hurting anyone." "You were stealing from this institution. Training time costs money, Miss Collins. Equipment maintenance costs money. By using our facilities without permission, you've committed theft of services." Hayes nodded to the guards. "Arrest her." "Wait!" Jessica stepped back, her mind racing. "You can't arrest me for using an abandoned simulator that nobody cared about. I improved my skills on a machine you were going to throw away." Hayes's smile was cruel. "Actually, I can, and I will, unless—" He paused dramatically. "You agree to never set foot on this property again. Sign a trespassing waiver that includes a confession of unauthorized equipment use, and we'll consider this matter closed." The document Hayes produced from his jacket was already prepared, as if he'd been planning this moment. Jessica scanned the legal language with growing horror. By signing, she would admit to criminal trespassing and agree to pay damages for equipment use and facility contamination, a sum that totaled more than her entire life savings. "Sign it or spend the night in county lockup," Hayes said. "Your choice." Jessica looked at the paper, then at the hangar that had been her sanctuary, then at the academy beyond where entitled cadets were probably preparing for another day of privilege and possibility. She signed. As Hayes tucked the document away, his expression turned almost pitying. "You know, Miss Collins, this could have all been avoided if you'd simply accepted reality. Some people are meant to fly, and others—" He gestured at her faded clothes and worn shoes. "Others are meant to serve those who do." The guards escorted her off the property one final time. As they walked, Jessica caught sight of Tyler Richardson and his crew filming from the dormitory windows, no doubt preparing another humiliating social media post about her final defeat. But what none of them noticed was the slight smile playing at the corners of Jessica's mouth. Because while they'd been focused on locking down an old hangar, they'd completely missed something crucial. That evening, Jessica sat in her motel room with her laptop open, scrolling through job listings at nearby airports. She'd burned through most of her savings during her extended stay, and reality was setting in. Maybe it was time to go home to Kansas, accept a job at the regional airport, and abandon her dreams of elite flight training. Her phone buzzed with a text from Danny. "Sorry about the hangar. Heard Hayes had it locked down. You okay?" Jessica stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "I'm fine. Thanks for everything." But she wasn't fine. She was furious. As night fell, she found herself walking past the academy's perimeter fence one last time. The F-35 demonstration was scheduled for Friday, just 3 days away. She could see workers setting up bleachers and media platforms for the event. VIP tents were being erected for sponsors and dignitaries. It would be the Academy's biggest publicity event of the year, with news crews and military officials in attendance. Captain Hayes would be front and center, basking in the prestige of hosting such an advanced aircraft. Jessica pulled out her phone and began making calls. The first was to Marcus Thompson, a former Air Force pilot she'd met during her brief stint at flight school in Colorado 2 years earlier. Marcus now worked as a private military contractor, training pilots for defense companies. "Jess, Jesus, I haven't heard from you in forever. How's the pilot training going?" "It's complicated, Marcus. I need to ask you something, and you're probably going to think I'm crazy." "Try me." Jessica took a deep breath. "How hard would it be for someone to get authorized flight time in an F-35? Marcus was quiet for so long that Jessica thought the call had dropped. Finally, he spoke. "That's not the kind of question someone asks unless they're planning something spectacular or spectacularly stupid. Which is it, Jess?" "Maybe both, but I need to know if it's possible." "Possible? Sure, if you got the right connections and credentials. The F-35 program has civilian test pilots and contractors who fly those birds regularly." Marcus paused. "But Jess, we're talking about the most advanced fighter jet in the world. You can't just rent one for the weekend. What if someone had already demonstrated exceptional skills in simulation? What if they had recommendations from qualified pilots? Then they might have a shot at getting into a contractor training program, but it would take months of evaluation, background checks, psychological testing." Marcus's voice sharpened. "Jess, what exactly are you planning?" Jessica closed her eyes. "Something that's going to change everything, or destroy me completely." "That's what I was afraid of. Listen, if you're serious about this, and I mean dead serious, not just angry at someone, I might know a guy, but you'd have to prove you're not just some wannabe with a grudge." "What would it take?" Marcus sighed. "Meet me at Denver Regional tomorrow. Bring your logbooks, your medical certificates, and any simulation records you've got. If you can convince me you're not completely insane, I'll make a call." As Jessica hung up, she felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with taking calculated risks. It was the same feeling she'd had every time she'd climbed into that old simulator, the same feeling that had driven her to spend her life savings chasing an impossible dream. The difference was that now she had nothing left to lose. And sometimes, that's when people become the most dangerous. The meeting at Denver Regional Airport changed everything. Marcus Thompson studied Jessica's logbooks with the intensity of a man who'd spent 20 years evaluating pilots for high-stakes missions. Her simulation records from the old Starhawk hangar were impressive, but what caught his attention were the detailed notes she'd kept on F-35 systems and procedures. "You taught yourself vertical landing protocols?" Marcus asked, raising an eyebrow. "The simulator had F-35 parameters in its database. I spent 40 hours mastering them." Marcus set down the papers and looked at her directly. "Jess, what you've accomplished here is remarkable, but what you're suggesting is career suicide. For both of us. You want to somehow get access to an F-35 and show up uninvited at your former academy's demonstration?" "That's exactly what I want to do. Do you understand what would happen if something went wrong? If you damaged a $100 million aircraft, if you crashed during an unauthorized flight?" Marcus shook his head. "We're talking federal prison time." Jessica leaned forward. "Marcus, they humiliated me in front of millions of people. They called me unqualified, said I didn't belong in the sky. Meanwhile, I've been teaching myself advanced flight systems that most of their cadets will never see. And you want revenge. I want justice. There's a difference." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. Finally, he pulled out his phone. "There's someone you need to meet. But first, you're going to spend the next 2 days proving you can actually do what you claim." The someone turned out to be Elena Vasquez, a former Navy test pilot who now worked for Lockheed Martin's F-35 program. She operated a private testing facility in Nevada where defense contractors evaluated new pilots for classified programs. "Marcus says you've been self-training on F-35 systems," Elena said, as they stood beside a state-of-the-art flight simulator. "If accurate, that's remarkable. If embellished, it's recklessly self-destructive." The next 6 hours were the most intense of Jessica's life. Elena put her through every conceivable scenario: system failures, combat maneuvers, emergency landings, stealth mode operations. The simulator was light years beyond the old machine at Starhawk, with full-motion platforms and realistic G-force simulation. Jessica flew like her life depended on it, because, in a way, it did. When the session ended, Elena removed her headset and stared at the performance data scrolling across her screens. "This is impossible. According to your background check, you've never been in a military training program. You've never had formal fighter jet instruction. But these scores—" "What do they mean?" Jessica asked, exhausted but hopeful. "They mean you're either naturally gifted beyond anything I've seen in 20 years, or you've been lying about your experience." Elena's eyes narrowed. "Which is it?" "I spent 3 weeks teaching myself on an abandoned simulator. That's it." Marcus whistled low. "Elena, I've seen her logbooks. She's telling the truth." Elena studied the data again, then made a decision that would change all their lives. "There's a contractor program I run for pilots who need unconventional training experiences. Officially, it doesn't exist. Unofficially, it's how we test people for black budget programs." She turned to Jessica. "If you can pass the full certification process, and I mean score in the top 10% on every single evaluation, I can arrange for you to have supervised flight time in an F-35. But Jessica, this isn't a game. One mistake, one moment of showing off, and you'll never fly anything more complex than a paper airplane again." "What's the catch?" Jessica asked. "The catch is that if you're really planning what Marcus thinks you're planning, you'll be doing it as a certified contractor pilot. That means when you show up at Starhawk's demonstration, you won't be some crazy person who stole a jet. You'll be a legitimate pilot with proper credentials." Jessica felt her pulse quicken. "And that makes the difference between federal prison and making your point without destroying your life," Elena finished. "Assuming you can handle the pressure." The next 48 hours were a blur of intensive training. Jessica flew scenarios that pushed the F-35's capabilities to their limits: night landings on aircraft carriers, dogfight simulations against multiple opponents, precision bombing runs, and stealth penetration of enemy airspace. She crashed the virtual aircraft 17 times in the first day. By the second day, she was flying like she'd been born in the cockpit. On Thursday morning, Eleanor made the call that would authorize Jessica's first live flight in an actual F-35. As they walked toward the hangar where the fighter jet waited, Eleanor grabbed Jessica's arm. "Last chance to walk away from this insanity. Are you absolutely sure?" Jessica looked at the sleek, deadly aircraft that represented the pinnacle of aviation technology. Tomorrow, pilots and cadets at Starhawk would be admiring a similar jet, never imagining that the girl they'd mocked and humiliated had earned the right to fly one. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Meanwhile, back at Starhawk Academy, Captain Hayes was putting the finishing touches on his speech for the F-35 demonstration. Media crews were arriving, VIP guests were being briefed, and the Academy's most privileged cadets were preparing to witness what Hayes called the future of aviation excellence. Tyler Richardson had organized a special live stream event, planning to broadcast the demonstration to his millions of followers. Madison Foster was coordinating with fashion sponsors who wanted to showcase pilot chic clothing during the event. None of them had any idea that their biggest humiliation was currently learning to fly the most advanced fighter jet on Earth. In Nevada, Jessica Collins completed her first successful F-35 flight, landing the aircraft with a precision that impressed even the ground crew. As she climbed out of the cockpit, Eleanor approached with a smile. "Congratulations, pilot. You're now certified to fly the Lightning II." Elena's expression grew serious. "Now let's talk about how you're going to make your entrance tomorrow." Friday morning arrived with clear skies and perfect flying conditions. At Starhawk Academy, the F-35 demonstration was drawing its largest crowd ever. Military officials, aviation industry leaders, and hundreds of spectators filled the bleachers surrounding the runway. Captain Hayes stood at the podium, resplendent in his dress uniform, addressing the gathered crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you're about to witness represents the pinnacle of aviation technology and training excellence. The F-35 Lightning II, piloted by Major Kevin Sullivan, will demonstrate the kind of precision and skill that Starhawk Academy instills in its elite cadets." In the VIP section, Tyler Richardson was live streaming to nearly 3 million viewers, his camera capturing the sleek fighter jet as it prepared for takeoff. "This is absolutely incredible, guys. We're talking about a $100 million aircraft, and we get to see it up close. This is what real aviation looks like." Madison Foster, positioned nearby with her own camera crew, added commentary about the exclusive nature of the event and how only the most qualified people were permitted to attend. What none of them noticed was the second F-35 Lightning II approaching from the east, its stealth capabilities making it nearly invisible to radar until it was almost overhead. Major Sullivan had just completed his first demonstration pass when air traffic control at Starhawk received an unexpected radio transmission. "Starhawk Tower, this is Lightning II requesting permission to join the demonstration." Captain Hayes grabbed the radio from the startled air traffic controller. "Lightning II, you are not authorized for this airspace. Identify yourself immediately." The response came in a calm, professional voice that would have been unrecognizable to most of the crowd. But Danny Rodriguez, watching from the maintenance area, nearly dropped his wrench. "Starhawk Tower, this is contractor pilot Collins. I'm here to show you what real pilot material looks like." The crowd buzzed with confusion as the second F-35 appeared overhead, executing a perfect barrel roll that demonstrated absolute mastery of the aircraft. Even Major Sullivan, an experienced military pilot, radioed his admiration. "Tower, whoever's flying Lightning II knows what they're doing." Captain Hayes' face went white as he realized who was speaking. "Collins, it can't be." Jessica's voice came through crystal clear. "Permission to land, Captain Hayes. I believe we have some unfinished business." Tyler Richardson's live stream exploded with comments as viewers tried to understand what was happening. His usual, confident commentary faltered. Guys, I'm not sure what's going on here, but there's a second F-35, and the pilot seems to know our academy." In the VIP section, aviation industry executives were pulling out their phones, trying to determine who had authorized a second aircraft for the demonstration. Military officials were equally puzzled, but their confusion turned to respect as they watched the unknown pilot execute maneuvers that showcased extraordinary skill. Jessica brought the F-35 in for a landing that was textbook perfect, smooth, controlled, and executed with the kind of precision that took years to develop. As the aircraft taxied to a stop beside Major Sullivan's jet, the crowd fell silent. The cockpit opened, and Jessica Collins emerged in a pristine flight suit, her movements confident and professional. She removed her helmet and looked directly at Captain Hayes, who stood frozen at the podium. "Captain Hayes," she called out, her voice carrying across the silent runway. "You said I wasn't qualified to be here. You said I didn't have the right credentials or background." She gestured to the F-35 behind her. "I'd like to discuss my qualifications now." The crowd erupted, cameras flashed, reporters shouted questions, and social media exploded with speculation. Tyler Richardson's livestream viewers were typing so fast the comment section became a blur of shocked reactions and questions. Major Sullivan approached Jessica with obvious curiosity and respect. "Ma'am, I have to say, that was some of the finest flying I've seen in 20 years. How did you—" "Major Sullivan," Jessica interrupted politely. "I appreciate the compliment, but I think Captain Hayes and I need to have a conversation first." Hayes finally found his voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "This is impossible. You don't have credentials?" Jessica pulled a leather folder from her flight suit and handed it to him. "Contractor pilot certification, F-35 Lightning II qualified, cleared for demonstration flights." She smiled. "Turns out there are ways to prove your abilities when people are willing to give you a chance." The media crowd pressed closer, sensing a story that was about to become legendary. A reporter from Aviation Weekly pushed to the front. "Ms. Collins, can you explain how you went from being rejected by this academy to becoming qualified to fly the most advanced fighter jet in the world?" Jessica's answer was directed at Hayes, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "When someone tells you that you don't belong somewhere, you have two choices. You can accept their judgment, or you can prove them wrong so decisively that they'll never make that mistake again." She turned to address the crowd, her voice strong and clear. 3 weeks ago, I was banned from this academy. I was told I wasn't pilot material because I didn't have the right connections, the right background, or the right clothes." She gestured to her flight suit. "Turns out the only thing that really matters is whether you can fly." In the VIP section, several Academy board members were frantically making phone calls. The media attention was immediate and intense, and they knew that this moment would define Starhawk's reputation for years to come. Tyler Richardson, his livestream now approaching 5 million viewers, was struggling to process what he was witnessing. The girl he'd humiliated and mocked had just demonstrated flying skills that surpassed anything he'd ever seen. But Jessica wasn't finished. She looked directly at Hayes and spoke with quiet authority. "Captain, I'm going to make you an offer. I'll consider joining your academy as an instructor, teaching advanced flight systems to cadets who actually want to learn, but first, you're going to make some changes to how you evaluate potential pilots." The crowd held its breath as Hayes stood speechless, the signed confession document he'd forced her to sign, now seeming like evidence of his own failure to recognize true talent. Jessica's final words carried across the runway like a challenge. "The question isn't whether I belong in the sky, Captain. The question is whether your academy is worthy of the pilots it claims to train." The silence that followed Jessica's challenge was deafening. Captain Hayes stood at the podium, his face cycling through shades of red and white as he processed the magnitude of his mistake. Around him, the gathered crowd of aviation professionals, military officials, and media representatives waited to see how he would respond to being publicly outmaneuvered by the woman he'd dismissed. General Patricia Wright, commander of the Air Force's F-35 program, stepped forward from the VIP section. Her presence commanded immediate respect, and even Hayes straightened his posture. "Ms. Collins," the general said, her voice carrying military authority, "I'm going to need to see your complete certification records. Flying an F-35 without proper authorization is a federal offense." Jessica reached into her flight suit and produced a tablet containing her complete training documentation. "General Wright, everything here is legitimate. I was certified through Vasquez Aerospace Consulting's contractor program under Department of Defense Authorization 77 Alpha Charlie. The general scrolled through the records, her eyebrows rising as she reviewed Jessica's test scores and flight evaluations. These performance metrics are extraordinary. Miss Collins, who recommended you for this program? No one recommended me, ma'am. I applied myself after demonstrating advanced simulation capabilities. General Wright looked up sharply. You mean you approached a DoD contractor program independently, without Academy sponsorship or military background? Yes, ma'am. I was told by certain people that I lacked the proper qualifications for flight training. Jessica's eyes found Captain Hayes. So, I decided to get them elsewhere. The general turned to Hayes with an expression that could have frozen jet fuel. Captain, am I to understand that you rejected an applicant who was subsequently certified by one of our most selective contractor programs? Hayes stammered. General, she had no background, no recommendations, no money, Jessica interrupted. That's what you meant to say, isn't it, Captain? No family connections, no social status, no ability to make major donations to your academy. Tyler Richardson, still live streaming to his millions of followers, watched his carefully constructed world crumble in real time. The comments section was exploding with viewers researching Jessica's story, finding the original videos of her humiliation, and drawing their own conclusions about Starhawk's admission policies. Madison Foster had stopped her own stream entirely, realizing that continuing to broadcast would only document her complicity in what was rapidly becoming a national scandal. General Wright handed the tablet back to Jessica. Ms. Collins, your qualifications are impeccable. In fact, they're better than 90% of the pilots currently flying F-35s. She turned back to Hayes. Captain, I think you owe this pilot an apology. Hayes's jaw worked silently for a moment before he managed to speak. There must have been some misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, Jessica said firmly. You made it perfectly clear that people like me don't belong here. You had security escort me off the property. You forced me to sign a confession admitting to trespassing for the crime of wanting to learn. She pulled out her phone and displayed the social media posts that had mocked her rejection. And your cadets made sure the whole world knew how unqualified you thought I was. Saudi Dr. Elizabeth Morgan, chairwoman of Starhawk's board of directors, had been making urgent phone calls since Jessica's arrival. Now she approached with the desperate smile of someone trying to manage a public relations catastrophe. Ms. Collins, on behalf of Starhawk Academy, I want to apologize for any miscommunication that may have occurred. We would be honored to offer you immediate admission to our program, with a full scholarship, of course. Jessica's laugh was sharp and humorless. Dr. Morgan, 3 weeks ago you had me arrested for trespassing. Now you want to offer me a scholarship? What changed? Well, clearly there was an error in our evaluation process. The error, Jessica interrupted, was assuming that worth is measured by wealth instead of skill. You don't want to admit me because you recognize my abilities. You want to admit me because I'm standing next to a $100 million aircraft that I just flew better than most of your graduates ever will. The crowd murmured in agreement. Several aviation industry executives were taking notes, clearly impressed by both Jessica's flying demonstration and her composure under pressure. Major Sullivan, who had been quietly observing the confrontation, stepped forward. If I may interject, I've been flying F-35s for 8 years, and what Ms. Collins demonstrated today was exceptional. The vertical landing she executed requires precision that typically takes months of training to develop. He looked directly at Hayes. Captain, in my experience, the best pilots aren't always the ones with the most prestigious backgrounds. They're the ones with the most determination and natural ability. You had both standing at your gate, and you turned them away. Tyler Richardson's livestream had become a disaster for his personal brand. His followers were abandoning him in real time, with comments flooding in about his arrogance and cruelty. Several of his corporate sponsors had already sent messages indicating they were reconsidering their partnerships. I was just... Tyler stammered into his phone, but he couldn't find words to justify his earlier behavior. Dr. Morgan tried again to salvage the situation. Ms. Collins, surely we can discuss this privately. Perhaps we could arrange for you to join our instructor staff, given your obvious qualifications. Dr. Morgan, Jessica's voice cut through the air like a blade, I didn't fly here to negotiate for a position at your academy. I came here to prove a point, and that point has been made. She gestured to the crowd of reporters and industry professionals. Everyone here has seen what happened. They've seen how you treat people who don't fit your narrow definition of suitable candidates. They've witnessed the arrogance and discrimination that passes for evaluation at this institution. General Wright nodded approvingly. Ms. Collins, the Department of Defense is always looking for pilots of your caliber. Have you considered applying to our advanced pilot training programs? Actually, General, I already have my next assignment lined up. I'll be working with Vasquez Aerospace to develop new training protocols for unconventional pilot candidates, people who might not have traditional backgrounds but possess exceptional natural ability. Hayes finally found his voice, though it came out defensive and bitter. This is all very dramatic, but one successful flight doesn't erase the fact that proper procedures exist for a reason. We can't simply admit anyone who shows up claiming they can fly. Jessica turned to face him directly, her expression calm but steely. Captain Hayes, you're absolutely right that proper procedures exist for a reason. The question is whether those procedures are designed to identify the best pilots or to exclude anyone who doesn't fit your social preferences. She pulled out the confession document he'd forced her to sign. When you made me sign this, admitting to theft of services for using an abandoned simulator, did you ever wonder what I was actually doing in that hangar? Hayes remained silent. I was teaching myself advanced flight systems. I was mastering procedures that some of your cadets will never encounter. I was proving that determination and intelligence matter more than family connections. Jessica tore the document in half. I won't be paying those damages, Captain. Consider this a lesson in recognizing actual talent. The crowd erupted in applause. Reporters were furiously taking notes, and several Academy board members were already discussing emergency policy reviews. Dr. Morgan made one final attempt at damage control. Ms. Collins, what would it take for you to consider working with us to improve our evaluation processes? Jessica looked around at the faces surrounding her, some apologetic, some defensive, some simply curious about what she would say next. Real change, she said finally. Not just policy updates or diversity initiatives designed to improve your public image. I want to see fundamental reforms in how you identify and nurture talent. I want blind evaluations based on skill, not background checks on family wealth. She paused, letting her words sink in. And I want Captain Hayes removed from any role involving candidate evaluation. His judgment has been proven fundamentally flawed. The gasp from the crowd was audible. Hayes stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. You can't just— Actually, General Wright interrupted, given what I've witnessed here today, I think Ms. Collins's concerns about evaluation procedures are entirely valid. The Department of Defense will be reviewing our partnership agreements with any institution that demonstrates systematic bias in candidate selection. Hayes realized that his career at Starhawk had just ended, destroyed by his own arrogance and the remarkable woman he'd dismissed as unworthy. As the crowd began to disperse, Jessica climbed back into the F-35's cockpit. Her demonstration was complete, but she had one final statement to make. Starhawk Tower, she radioed. This is Lightning 2 requesting departure clearance. Lightning 2, you are cleared for departure, and Miss Collins, safe travels. Jessica smiled as she powered up the engines. Through her headset, she could hear radio chatter from pilots across the region who had been monitoring the frequency. Word of her demonstration was already spreading through the aviation community. As the F-35 lifted off, Jessica executed one final maneuver. A perfect victory roll that left no doubt about her mastery of the aircraft. The crowd below watched in awe as she climbed into the blue sky, leaving Starhawk Academy forever changed in her wake. Tyler Richardson stood among the dispersing crowd, his phone silent for the first time in months. His live stream had ended in humiliation, his followers had abandoned him, and his carefully constructed image as a superior pilot had been shattered by someone he'd considered beneath notice. But it was Captain Hayes who faced the most complete destruction. As board members and military officials filed past him without acknowledgement, he realized that his reputation in aviation was finished. The woman he'd dismissed as unqualified had proven to be more skilled than anyone in his academy's history. And somewhere in the Nevada desert, Elena Vasquez watched Jessica's perfect landing and smiled. The pilot she'd certified had done more than prove her individual worth. She'd struck a blow for every qualified candidate who'd ever been rejected for the wrong reasons. Jessica Collins had taken to the sky as an unknown outcast and landed as a legend. 2 weeks after the Starhawk demonstration, Jessica's story had become aviation legend. The video of her confrontation with Captain Hayes had been viewed over 50 million times across all platforms. Major media outlets were calling it the flight that changed everything, and aviation schools nationwide were scrambling to review their admission policies. Jessica sat in Elena Vasquez's office at the Nevada training facility, reviewing contract offers that had poured in from aerospace companies, military contractors, and even Hollywood producers wanting to tell her story. "Boeing wants you to lead their next-generation pilot training program," Elena said, sliding another folder across the desk. "Lockheed Martin is offering a chief test pilot position, and the Air Force has extended an invitation for you to design new recruitment protocols." Jessica thumbed through the offers, each more impressive than the last. "It's surreal. 3 weeks ago, I couldn't get past the front gate of a flight school. Now some of the biggest names in aviation want to hire me." "You've proven that talent exists in places they never thought to look," Elena replied. "That's valuable to organizations that actually care about results over pedigree." Meanwhile, the fallout at Starhawk Academy continued to unfold like a slow-motion disaster. Captain Hayes had been terminated for conduct inconsistent with the Academy's values, though everyone knew the real reason was the public relations nightmare he'd created. 3 board members had resigned under pressure, and enrollment applications from wealthy families had dropped by 60%. Tyler Richardson had fared even worse. His social media empire collapsed overnight as sponsors fled and followers abandoned him in droves. The videos of him mocking Jessica had been compiled into a devastating highlight reel that showed his cruelty in stark detail. Aviation companies that had once courted him for endorsements now refused to take his calls. In a desperate attempt to salvage his reputation, Tyler had posted a public apology video that only made things worse, his obvious insincerity, and continued. Arrogance had sparked another wave of criticism, with viewers dissecting every word for evidence of his unchanged character. "I just want to say that maybe I misjudged the situation at Starhawk," Tyler had said in the video, his voice lacking any real remorse. "But you have to understand, we get a lot of people who think they can just walk in and demand to be pilots. How were we supposed to know she was actually qualified?" The video's comment section had been brutal. "You could have tested her skills instead of judging her shoes. This is what privilege looks like when it's forced to face consequences. Your apology is worse than your original behavior." Back at Starhawk, Dr. Morgan was conducting emergency meetings with the remaining board members, trying to develop a recovery plan. The Academy's reputation was in freefall, and their military contracts were under review. "We need to show dramatic change," Dr. Morgan told the assembled board. "The Department of Defense is threatening to pull our certification program. Half our sponsors have canceled contracts. We're facing an existential crisis." Board member Robert Chen raised his hand. "What about reaching out to Jessica Collins directly, if we could get her endorsement of our reform efforts?" "She's not returning our calls," Dr. Morgan interrupted. "And frankly, I don't blame her. We treated her abominably, and now she has her pick of opportunities elsewhere." What they didn't know was that Jessica had been quietly working behind the scenes to help other rejected candidates find opportunities. She'd connected with Danny Rodriguez to identify promising maintenance workers who wanted to transition to pilot roles. She'd reached out to community colleges to establish pathways for students from non-traditional backgrounds. Her phone rang constantly with calls from aspiring pilots who had faced similar rejections at elite academies. Each conversation reinforced her commitment to changing how the aviation industry identified and developed talent. "Ms. Collins," came a voice on her latest call. "My name is Maria Santos. I saw your story on the news, and I wondered if you might have advice for someone in a similar situation." Jessica settled back in her chair. Tell me what happened, Maria. I applied to 3 different flight schools this year. I have perfect test scores, 3 years of experience as an aircraft mechanic, and I've been flying small planes since I was 16. But every school rejected me because I don't have recommendation letters from established pilots or family connections in aviation. What's your background? Jessica asked. My father runs a small auto repair shop in Phoenix. I worked my way through community college and saved every penny for flight training. I know I'm qualified, but the schools act like I'm asking for charity instead of the chance to prove myself. Jessica smiled. This was exactly why she'd started the Collins Foundation for Aviation Excellence, to create opportunities for pilots, like Maria, who had the skills but lacked the connections. Maria, how would you feel about participating in a new type of evaluation program, one that judges pilots purely on ability? 3 days later, Maria Santos was standing in the same Nevada facility where Jessica had earned her F-35 certification, preparing for the most important flight test of her life. Elena Vasquez had agreed to evaluate candidates recommended by Jessica using the same rigorous standards that had identified Jessica's exceptional abilities. The program had already attracted attention from progressive aviation companies who recognized that traditional recruitment was missing outstanding candidates. Within 6 months, Jessica's foundation had placed 47 pilots in positions throughout the industry, all of them individuals who had been rejected by conventional programs. But perhaps the most satisfying development came when Jessica received an unexpected visitor at the Nevada facility. Danny Rodriguez appeared in the lobby one afternoon, wearing a crisp new uniform from Mesa Airlines. "Danny!" Jessica exclaimed, embracing her old friend. "What are you doing here?" "Well," Danny grinned, "it turns out that someone nominated me for a pilot training program with a major carrier. They said my mechanical background and work ethic made me an ideal candidate for their accelerated program." Jessica's eyes sparkled with mischief. "I have no idea who might have done such a thing." The recruiter mentioned that their new hiring consultant specifically requested they review applications from aircraft maintenance personnel. Apparently, this consultant believes that people who understand how planes work make better pilots than people who just understand how trust funds work. They both laughed, but Danny's expression grew serious. "Jess, you know this is bigger than just the 2 of us, right? What you did at Starhawk, it's changing everything. Aviation schools are scrambling to prove they're not discriminatory. Companies are expanding their recruitment beyond traditional sources. You didn't just prove a point, you started a revolution." Jessica looked out the window at the training aircraft taking off and landing, carrying the next generation of pilots who would never have had these opportunities under the old system. "The revolution was already happening, Danny. All I did was give it wings." As if to emphasize her point, Maria Santos's voice crackled through the radio as she completed her evaluation flight with a perfect score. Another exceptional pilot had been discovered, and another barrier had fallen. At Starhawk Academy, Dr. Morgan was reading the latest enrollment report when her assistant knocked on the door. "Ma'am, there's someone here to see you," she says. "Her name is Jessica Collins." Dr. Morgan's heart raced as Jessica entered her office, composed and professional in a simple business suit. The same woman who had been escorted off the property in worn sneakers now commanded attention with quiet authority. "Dr. Morgan, I have a proposition for you." 6 months had passed since Jessica's dramatic demonstration at Starhawk Academy, and the aviation world had fundamentally changed. The Collins Foundation for Aviation Excellence had become the most respected alternative pathway into professional flying, with a 97% success rate for pilots completing their program. Jessica stood in the renovated Hangar 7 at Starhawk Academy, the same building where she'd secretly trained on the old simulator. Now it housed state-of-the-art equipment and served as the headquarters for the Academy's new merit-based evaluation program, which Jessica had agreed to design and oversee. Dr. Morgan approached with their latest recruitment statistics. "Jessica, I wanted you to see these numbers. This year's incoming class is the most diverse in our history, and their average skill scores are 20% higher than previous years." Jessica nodded, reviewing the data. "When you evaluate candidates based on ability instead of background, you discover talent you never knew existed." The transformation hadn't been easy. Starhawk had lost several major donors who disapproved of the new policies, but they'd gained something more valuable: respect from the aviation community and partnership agreements with Progressive Aerospace, companies who wanted access to the exceptional pilots the reformed academy was producing. Tyler Richardson's story had taken a different turn. After his social media empire collapsed and his aviation prospects evaporated, he disappeared from public view entirely. Jessica had heard rumors that he was working at his father's airline, in a ground position, but she felt no satisfaction in his downfall. His humiliation had been self-inflicted, a consequence of his own choices rather than any action she'd taken. Captain Hayes, on the other hand, had made a surprising decision. Rather than flee the aviation industry, he'd approached Jessica privately and asked for a chance to make amends. "Ms. Collins," he'd said during their tense meeting, "I was wrong about you, and I was wrong about a lot of other people. I let arrogance and prejudice cloud my judgment, and I cost this academy and the aviation industry years of missed opportunities." Jessica had studied his face, looking for signs of insincerity. "Captain Hayes, what exactly are you asking for?" "A chance to learn from my mistakes. I'd like to volunteer for your foundation's outreach program, helping identify talented candidates in underserved communities. I know I can't undo the damage I've caused, but maybe I can prevent it from happening to others." It had been a difficult decision, but Jessica ultimately agreed to give Hayes a probationary role in the Foundation's community outreach efforts. His knowledge of aviation and his personal experience with bias made him surprisingly effective at recognizing and correcting discriminatory practices in recruitment. The knock on Jessica's office door interrupted her reminiscing. Maria Santos entered, now wearing the uniform of a major commercial airline's pilot training program. "Jessica, I wanted to thank you one more time before I start with United next week. Without your foundation, I'd still be fixing engines instead of flying planes. Maria, you earned everything you've achieved. The foundation just provided the opportunity for your skills to be recognized." "That's exactly what makes the difference," Maria replied. "For the first time, merit actually matters more than money." As Maria left, Jessica's assistant announced her next appointment, General Wright from the Department of Defense. "Miss Collins," the general said as she entered, "I have an interesting proposition. The Air Force wants to implement your evaluation methodology for our pilot recruitment program. We're particularly interested in your approach to identifying exceptional candidates from non-traditional backgrounds." Jessica leaned forward with interest. "What did you have in mind, General?" "A partnership between the Collins Foundation and the Air Force Academy. We want you to design a new pathway for enlisted personnel and civilian candidates to earn pilot training opportunities based purely on demonstrated ability." It was exactly the kind of systemic change Jessica had hoped to achieve. "I'd be honored to work on that program, General." Their conversation was interrupted by Jessica's phone buzzing with a text from Elena Vasquez. "Turn on Channel 7 News. You need to see this." Jessica switched on the television to find a breaking news report about a commercial airliner that had experienced multiple system failures during approach to Denver International Airport. The pilot had managed an emergency landing that saved all 247 passengers and crew. "The pilot being hailed as a hero is Captain David Kim," the reporter announced, a graduate of the Collins Foundation training program who was previously rejected by 3 traditional flight schools due to his unconventional background as a former taxi driver. Jessica smiled as she watched the interview with Captain Kim, remembering the determined young man who had approached her foundation 6 months earlier after being told he was too old and too inexperienced to become a commercial pilot. "I just did what I was trained to do," Captain Kim was telling the reporter. "The Collins Foundation taught me that flying isn't about where you come from. It's about how well you can handle the aircraft when everything goes wrong." General Wright watched the report with obvious approval. "Ms. Collins, that pilot just proved your point better than any demonstration could. The traditional system would have kept him driving a taxi instead of saving lives in a cockpit." As the general left to begin planning their partnership, Jessica found herself alone in Hangar 7, surrounded by the quiet hum of modern training equipment. She walked to the window overlooking the runway where just months earlier she had landed an F-35 and changed everything. Danny Rodriguez appeared beside her, having finished his shift as a newly certified commercial pilot. "Remember when this place felt like an impossible dream?" "It feels like a lifetime ago," Jessica replied. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd just accepted their rejection and gone home to Kansas." The aviation industry would have lost one of its most talented pilots, and thousands of other qualified people would still be stuck on the outside looking in. Danny's expression grew thoughtful. "Jess, do you ever regret the way things happened? The public confrontation, the media attention, all of it?" Jessica considered the question carefully. "I regret that it was necessary. I regret that systemic change required such a dramatic demonstration. But I don't regret fighting for what was right." Her phone rang with yet another call from an aspiring pilot seeking guidance. Jessica answered with the same patient attention she gave to every candidate who reached out. "Collins Foundation, this is Jessica." "Ms. Collins, my name is Robert Chen Jr. I'm calling because I was rejected from several flight schools, and I heard that your foundation helps people like me." Jessica paused, recognizing the name. Chen Jr. was the son of the Starhawk board member who had suggested reaching out to her during their crisis meetings. "Robert, tell me about your experience." "Well, it's kind of ironic. My father serves on the board at Starhawk Academy, but I was rejected from their program because my test scores weren't high enough and I don't have the right family background in aviation. When I mentioned this to my dad, he told me I should call you." Jessica laughed softly. "Your father is a wise man, Robert. When can you come in for an evaluation?" As she scheduled Robert's assessment, Jessica reflected on how completely the narrative had changed. 6 months ago, she had been deemed unworthy of consideration by institutions that now sought her approval and partnership. The same people who had dismissed her were now sending their own children to her foundation for fair evaluation. But the real measure of success wasn't in the recognition or the partnerships or even the media attention that continued to follow her story. It was in the quiet moments like this: a young person getting a chance they deserved, a qualified pilot finding their place in the sky, an industry slowly learning to value substance over status. Jessica's assistant knocked on her door one final time. "Miss Collins, there's someone here to see you. She says she's from a small town in Ohio and has been driving for 2 days to get here." "Send her in." A young woman entered, nervous but determined, carrying a worn flight bag and wearing the same expression of desperate hope that Jessica remembered feeling at Starhawk's gate. "Miss Collins, my name is Amanda Brooks. I've wanted to be a pilot my entire life, but everyone says I don't have what it takes. I saw your story on the news and I thought maybe you might give me a chance." Jessica stood and extended her hand to Amanda. "Let's go take a look at what you can do." As they walked toward the simulator bay, Jessica caught sight of her reflection in the hangar windows. The woman looking back at her wore a confident expression and professional attire, but her eyes held the same fierce determination that had carried a rejected applicant from a bus stop to the cockpit of an F-35. Outside, aircraft practiced takeoffs and landings against the backdrop of a brilliant sunset. New pilots were learning to fly, barriers were falling, and somewhere in the sky another person who had been told they weren't good enough was proving the world wrong. Jessica Collins had arrived at Starhawk Academy as an unknown dreamer and left as a legend, but her real legacy wasn't the dramatic demonstration or the media coverage or even the institutional changes she had forced. Her legacy was in every person who would never again be told that their dreams were too big for their background. Her legacy was in a sky that was finally open to anyone with the skill and determination to claim it. And as she watched Amanda Brooks settle into the simulator cockpit with the same nervous excitement she had once felt, Jessica knew that the revolution she had started would continue long after her own flying days were over. The sky at last belonged to everyone who dared to reach for it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and become a part of our Everyday Life Stories community. Where are you watching from? Drop a comment below. We love hearing from our amazing viewers around the world.